currently to manage our activities as well as our timeline items, we are providing a bunch of functions from our root component to all descendant components by using technique provide inject. And there are actually a lot of provide function calls in the root component. And if we're going to continue using such techniques, amount of these function calls will grow even more. So instead of providing data to descendant components and then accessing this data by using inject function calls, we can go a different road, and instead of providing data to descendant components, we can leverage our global stores, activities, and timeline items that were created in the previous lessons. And now let's try it out. In the activity item component, we're going to add another import statement to import those functions that are required by this component, such as set activity seconds to complete, as well as delete activity. We are importing this function directly from our global module activities, and then we no longer need to use those keys for function inject. So let's just remove these imports. And then there is also no need to call function inject to access those two functions that we have just imported directly from activities module. So we can easily remove these two lines. And now let's figure out where period select options array gets generated. So we could also import this array directly from one of the modules. Currently, this array is generated inside our root component. Here when using function provide, we're also calling function generate period select options to generate array of period select options. So let's just change the place where we are generating this array by cutting this import of generate period select options function and moving it into constants.js module. And in here, we're gonna use this function to generate that array and assign it directly to a new constant that we're gonna define in here with the name period select options. And as a value, we're gonna call generate period select options function. And this way, we're basically generating this array one time, and then we will be able to reuse this constant anywhere we wish. And by the way, at some point in the past, we have already had such constant defined inside constant.js, but as project evolves, sometimes we tend to try different approaches which better suit current situation. And in this particular case, I guess defining this array directly inside constants.js module will better fit our current needs. And by doing this, now we can go back to activity item component and no longer use this function inject to get access to period select options. So instead we're going to import this array directly from the module constants.js. This way we don't also need this key we were previously using for function inject. So let's remove this import and instead import period select options array from constants module. And also import of function inject is no longer needed as well. And now we just need to pass this period select options array to the appropriate prop of base select component right here. And as we can see, we were able to completely get rid of function inject in this component. So we're gonna do the same in other components. Let's switch over to the activity form component. In here, we're using function inject only once. So instead of using this function, we're gonna remove it along with imports of function inject and the key create activity key. And instead, let's just import the function that we need, create activity directly from our global store activities, like so. And now we're able to easily call this function directly inside submit function. So we can move on to the next component, timeline item, which uses function inject twice. So we're gonna do the same thing and replace these two function calls with direct imports of the data we need. The first import will import set timeline item activity function from timeline items module, and the second import will import activity select options array from activities module. And of course, this key set timeline item activity key as well as activity select options key are no longer needed. So we're gonna remove this import. Let's just use a proper import name instead of activity select options key. We need to use activity select options. And this way we're able to completely get rid of usage of function inject along with its import, Let's scroll down and get rid of those two mentions of function inject, because the data we were previously accessing by using function inject, we are importing directly. Next up is component timeline stopwatch. In here, let's also replace inject function call by direct import of update timeline item activity seconds from timeline items module, and this way we can remove that call of the function inject as well as its import right here. And now we're almost ready to completely get rid of those provide function calls in our app component. Except of delete activity function, we still have to do a couple more things in regards to delete activity function. So this function gets called whenever we click on delete activity button on activities page. So let's just do this. Let's copy over this declaration, move it inside activity item component. And based on this implementation, we're going to declare new local function called delete and reset activity. This function is going to take one parameter, which is activity we are about to delete. And then basically, instead of calling delete activity function when we click on delete activity button, we're going to call our new function delete and reset activity like so. So now the only thing left in this component to do is actually importing reset timeline item activities function from timeline items module. Let's do it right here. And after doing all this refactoring, we can go back to our main component, and here we can completely get rid of all provide function calls, because all the data that we were previously providing to descendant components we're now importing in all descendant components directly from global stores activities and timeline items. And additionally, after removing all these function calls in app component, there are a lot of import statements that are no longer used. We can remove those import statements as well. And as we can see, eventually our main component has become really simple. It contains only import statements, and the rest of the logic is spread by different JavaScript modules as well as Vue components. And by the way, that module keys.js that contained all our keys used in provide function calls as well as inject function calls is no longer used because we do not use provide function calls at all. So let's go ahead and completely remove this module keys.js. And now let's just quickly go ahead and run through our application and check if main functionality of our application works as intended. We're going to try to set up the time for particular activity. Then let's create new activity. Let's also try to remove some activity, then switch over to timeline page and start tracking time for some activity. And let's make sure that on activities page, this time will be decreasing every second. That's what we're seeing. As we can see, this is all working. Now let's also try to remove all activities and see if our empty state is properly displayed. Everything looks good, so we can continue working on our project in the next lesson.